Yes, I'm going to be talking to you about Friendship NGO, which is a Bangladeshi organization that has developed a holistic multi-sectoral model in Bangladesh, which is a heavily climate-affected country, as we heard of in the previous talk. And we're going to start off with a little introductory video just to paint the picture, set the setting so that you can kind of visualize where we are.
আর নদীটা ওই যে চরে ছিল, ওই যে চরটা আছে না, তার পূর্ব পাশে ছিল নদীটা। বন্যা আসলে আমাদের খুব কষ্ট হয়।
Chors are so vulnerable. Climate impacts them daily. It impacts their lives, it impacts their livelihood, it impacts their social behavior, and unfortunately, of course, their economic and political behavior. And for them, you need to provide everything, whole ecosystem.
When I started Friendship 20 years ago, we started with 4 promises of saving lives,
Climate adaptation, poverty alleviation, and empowerment.
and these are the 4 pillars on which Friendship today stands.
There we go. So you just saw a glimpse of Runa Khan, who's the founder of Friendship, and she founded the organization in 2002. So we're in Bangladesh. As Alba gave you a few figures, here is the comparison with France. A huge population density, which puts enormous stress on land and resources. That's something to keep in mind. And then on the left here of the screen, we have the adverse impacts from human-caused climate change as described by the IPCC. And I've just noted with Friendship's logos the areas of intervention across the different sectors where we intervene. Just to situate Bangladesh, under the Himalayas, where more and more glaciers are melting, so more and more water is coming down. All of the major rivers from the Himalayas end up in the Bengal Delta, which is the coastline of Bangladesh. And you can kind of see, if I can get, here you have the Brahmaputra River, and here the Ganges that meet and end up in this huge delta in this area here. And Friendship started doing interventions in the Char region. So this is a Char. This is a silt island in the middle of the Brahmaputra that is 40 kilometers wide during flood season. So slightly bigger than La Loire, which is 5 minutes away. And in the middle of the Brahmaputra, you have these islands where you have between 5 million to 20 million, depending on your data source, people living in these areas. This is to mainly show you our intervention areas. So as I said, we started in the north and slowly expanded to the south, doing coastal adaptation interventions. And we also have major operations in Ukiah, which is the main area for the Rohingya crisis refugee camps, which is a different type of intervention that we do that I'll speak a little bit less about, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them afterwards. Our vision and mission, key here is from Bangladesh, and that's part of the model that I want to tell you about. Not only the types of interventions, but how the way the organization was set up has led to us having this impact, being community-led and international. And the key to this is really friendship's wheel. So it can sound a bit cheesy, but I promise this is all true. We go by these 5 values, and they're the core of each one of our programs. From the values, you can move out to different approaches, so values-driven, needs-based, participative, integrated development model, and entrepreneurial mindset that then lead into 6 sectors, so climate action, education, health, inclusive citizenship, sustainable economic development, and cultural preservation, that each lead into 4 promises that Runa presented in the video. And so, as I mentioned, it started in 2002, and I'm not going to go into each year, but it's to show you how organically the organization was developed. It was the idea of Runa was you have to start in an area where there is absolutely no health services, or there were no health services. So if you can save lives, people can then think about developing their own livelihoods, going to school in an area where there is no education services either. And so that's how the organization started. LFH was the first hospital ship that we had, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about how that all functions. And then there were climate action interventions, which is for disaster preparedness at the very start. Then you can think about education and sustainable economic development programs. And then throughout the years, there were, through innovation, expansion, and work with the local communities, we ended up to where we are today, which is a fairly big organization. These are just some numbers that we don't really go about, but they're always good for metrics to have. And so the structure as it is today really helps to organize how a multi-sectoral organization can function, and to think about the governance. So Friendship Bangladesh is the headquarters of Friendship International Network, where I sit here at Friendship France. We are here. The sole purpose, if I'm to simplify it, is for fundraising, because most of the funds are going to be in Europe and the US. But most of the work I do, I'm actually more in contact with colleagues in Bangladesh than I am with my 4 colleagues in France. In Bangladesh here, I think the latest is slightly higher than this, but yeah, 3,500 paid staff. You can add almost the equivalent of that in voluntary staff. And I don't mean volunteers from Europe and the US traveling there. It's people from the communities who volunteer in disaster risk reduction, schooling, etc. And over 2/3 of the staff are recruited, of the paid staff are recruited from within the communities, which ensures a real local anchorage in the intervention areas. The interventions are set across 6 sectors that are supported by central supporting units. So this is, all the operations are really important. So admin, procurement, field operations, communications, fleet management for our fleet of hospital ships. All of these are central to every single one of these sectors. Obviously, finance, we're an NGO, we depend heavily on funds. And as you can imagine, these are dire times. And then partnership development is the key hub with whom we work to try and, we are really an intermediary between the donors that are here in Europe, for me specifically France, and Bangladesh. I'm going to go a bit more into the 4 commitments, just to give you an idea of the types of interventions that Friendship has put in place and how they all feed into it. And then I'll come into 3 projects and zoom into those a bit more. So saving lives, it really started with healthcare for all, and as I said, the Lifebuoy Friendship Hospital. Lifebuoy is the name of a Unilever product, and they were the first sponsor back in 2002, and that made this whole journey possible. This particular boat came from Dunkerque. It's a bit of a crazy story. Jean-Yves Marre, so who's French, he was an Air France steward, was a bit of an adventurer. There was a law that passed in 1996 that decided to narrow most of the French canals. So a whole fleet of river boats were going to become obsolete. He thought that was ridiculous because these boats could be used for many reasons. If I simplify it, he opened a map of the world, looked where there was the most water between the Amazon basin and the Bengal Delta. There are a lot more people in the Bengal Delta, so that's where he set sail for. Literally crossing the whole of France through its canal system, which was the easy part, out through the Mediterranean to the Suez Canal, and then out into the Indian Ocean, all the way up to Bangladesh. Couple of years to get there, and obviously a few scares, because any of you that have ever sailed know that riverboats aren't supposed to go on the sea or the ocean. So that's how it started. And then you have acute rescue when you have disasters like floods, cyclone shelter, water treatment plants that we heard a little bit about to provide potable water, food relief after disasters once again. And this can be quite linked to climate adaptation, where you'll have climate compatible housing, adaptive farming, solar panel, shelter. I mentioned the cyclones earlier. And here, for example, is an elevated village that we call a plinth, that was designed with engineers actually from the Université de Liège in Belgium, that is oval shaped because when the floods happen, you can imagine that all around there are waters, and the oval shape limit river erosion, riverbank erosion, sorry. And so this particular plinth can shelter 200 families, and there is a school on one end and a community center on the other to ensure that the village life and the community life can continue during multiple weeks. There's an area for livestock, there's an area for vegetable growing, multiple weeks and months. There's a hollow middle to collect rainwater to wash their clothes, because all the water around the plinth is going to become contaminated and polluted because of the floods, but also they can do agriculture and raise fish. Community-led adaptation. In each community where we have climate adaptation interventions, there is a committee of community members, that are going to decide and map out. I was there in May and blown away of the level of collective intelligence, where within the community center they actually have hand-drawn posters of all the recent floods across the years, with very clear signs of, okay, we're this season, these are the risks, this is how we can mitigate for them. There's a map of the community that identifies all the vulnerable households. So you're going to have elderly, you're going to have young children, you're going to have pregnant women that are going to be identified, and flood volunteers will then target them for relief when a flash flood will happen. Poverty alleviation. This is really the next step to enabling development and empowerment. So one of our big interventions are the farmers collectives, where you'll have a farmers club in our interventions area that will allow the sharing of innovative, sustainable agricultural practices and sharing of practice and knowledge between farmers in the surrounding area. They'll also provide an area to access markets, and so the farmers can sell their produce. This goes hand in hand. I don't think there's a photo here. It was probably in the other one. Yeah, with solar villages, where access to energy and renewable green energy was actually pivotal to not only farmers so that they could open their stalls in the evening after dark because they didn't have any light source, but also to school kids who could do their homework in the evening, and so that's a huge lever for development, accessing education. Which is where empowerment comes in. Friendship has developed a very big education program with schools across all of the country that have some of the best national results, where we don't only focus on the national curricula, but we also set it with their local environment. I think I'm going to talk a bit more about that in the roundtable discussion, but just about the risks and benefits, for example, of the river, and so that kids can grow without fearing the river. They have swimming lessons, for example, clean house, clean homes, clean schools, clean homes. Sorry, interventions to teach them about the importance of hygiene and being in a clean environment, and the links between all those different components. Paralegal booths, gender equality, these are all linked to government services where we facilitate, for example, taking legal action for whatever reason. Usually it'll be conflicts around land ownership and being able to grow produce. But you also have a lot of child marriage issues in these areas, which is illegal in Bangladesh, but that still happens because usually families can't sustain the finances for their daughters, and so they'll usually marry them to an elder man. And so we're trying to mitigate that as much as possible, as well as within the communities, but also taking action at government level. And so now let me just go into 3 specific projects that we have. So climate-adapted participative health system, where it relies on 3 tiers. We have the hospitals, 7 which are ship hospitals like LFH here, the satellite clinics, and Friendship Community Medicaids, which are community health agents that are recruited from within the communities directly. The ships will kind of anchor in one given area, and a camp around the ship will be built, and it will stay there for approximately 3 months before moving on to a different island. And during that time, you have satellite clinics that visit a community every month. So every day they'll visit a new community, and that community will receive the nurses and primary healthcare professionals once a month. And so they'll conduct the immunization program as per government recommendations, primary health clinics, cervical cancer clinics, and they also facilitate nutrition sessions, which are really important, looking at what local produce can the families use to try and avoid and combat stunting, for example, and underdevelopment. And all of this is backed up by the community Medicaids, which are trained into basic primary healthcare monitoring, so taking basic measurements, for example, for stunting. And then they are connected to satellite clinics and the hospitals via an internal software called mHealth, which uses a basic smartphone algorithm to identify whether a patient needs to be referred either to the nearby satellite clinic or the hospital ships. The hospital ships can take up to basic tertiary level healthcare. They won't do open heart surgery, but those patients, for example, if they require it, will be referred to by the boat ambulance to the nearest government facility. Yeah, so as I was saying, all of these are connected and I have now, thanks to some work over the last couple of years, all the records are digitally kept. And so I was speaking to some fellow speakers here and saying how that can now be used also for further research. Recently, IDOHDAY kind of validated the model, the three-tier healthcare model, showing how adapted to climate change it is in an area that's highly prone to floods, but also how affordable it is because all the services are free. Then it means that we're highly dependent on donor funding, obviously. But yeah, that's one example. And then our mangrove afforestation program. We're now in the southern part of Bangladesh. This area in dark green is the Sundarbans mangrove forest. It's the biggest mangrove forest in the world, UNESCO World Heritage Site. The border to India is approximately here. And so you can imagine from the shading here, you could imagine an area that was probably at least this was covered by mangroves pre-British Empire era, where the land was heavily exploited for its resources by both the British Empire, but also local communities that needed those resources for fuel and cooking, etc. So we're approximately here, which is 30 to 40 kilometers away from the coast, but all of these water systems are still affected by tidal movements. And so it looks like this at high tide, and you can imagine that at low tide, it looks like this. You have an area which is highly dependent on shrimp farming and has very little other economic opportunities. So whatever you're going to develop has to improve the economic perspectives of those communities, and very fragile infrastructure. This is the only dam between the water, and you can see here some houses and other communities, that during a cyclone, for example, these dams will break very easily. And we were at a stage where dams would break every year because they would have a cyclone on a yearly basis. So to kind of counter that, Friendship started a mangrove afforestation program based on the community participation, where these are one of the maps that I was telling, similar to the one I was telling you about. Probably can't see much detail there, but a committee group will draw out the map and identify the areas of fragility within the dam, where the rural livelihoods dependent activities, so either the shrimp farming activities or if they're rice cultures, and where the people are living and where the vulnerable people. And we'll then develop nurseries that look like this. I always get asked why they round. We don't have an answer, but it looks pretty cool. Where we use 6 species that come from the Sundarbans, so totally endemic, because they will have different growth rates and also imitate a natural forest, which will have a greater impact at breaking waves and protecting the dams. And so this photo is, I took 2024, so when I was there 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And this dam, as you can see, has now vegetation growing on it. These are the mangroves that we planted, or that the community planted. And this dam hasn't broken since. This was 5 years after the beginning of this program, and we estimate that that's the time needed for the mangroves to be mature enough to have a fully protective impact. You might have heard a lot of mangroves because they're very trendy in the development sector. We really started it to protect communities and their livelihoods and avoid the dams breaking. But now we're seeing, within the first 5 years, you see biodiversity restoration, and you can tell by fishermen coming back to areas that they had totally deserted. And so that's providing another source of livelihood to the people that were highly dependent on shrimp farming, for example. You need to keep in mind that the protection of the nurseries and the plantation areas are key, which is why there's this photo here of a community caretaker running after a goat, which loved to graze on the small plants. And this actually, installing fences along the plantation areas was probably the most impactful adjustment that was made during the project, and that really allowed the trees to grow. And now goat owners totally realize the impact that mangrove is having on protecting them and don't want their goats anywhere near them. And then finally, I wanted to give you an example of a project that we launched last year with the French Development Agency. That's kind of a concentrated approach to all of Friendship's interventions and approaches, where we have one specific objective that's focused on health, one on empowerment and education activities, and one on climate adaptation and resilience, all within one single project, which in the development sector is fairly rare, let's say, and at least for us, it's the first time that one of our donors fund different programs or different sectoral approaches. And for AFD, it's also their first time via their social civil society branch. These happen in two different areas. So Kurigram district is in the north, where close to where Friendship started, and then Chatkira is in the south that I just showed before with mangrove plantation. Here we're replicating the Friendship health system in an area where there are very little or poor level health services. Then we are strengthening 5 schools, and we have a huge program on fighting against child marriage, both, as I said, raising awareness within the communities, but also working with government to allow better detection by local authorities. And then, as I said, mangrove afforestation and the construction of 2 plinths in these areas. This is the project consortium. Such a project takes a lot of work to coordinate. Now? Yeah, okay, thank you. So because it's an AFD funded project, Friendship France, we're coordinating it very closely with Bangladesh, obviously. We have different technical partners. So RAW is an architectural association, IHE, Institute for Water Education, and they're heavily working on this aspect of climate adaptation. Action Against Hunger, which I'm sure you've all heard of, they're helping develop quality health services with a nutrition aspect, and Friendship across all of them. As this is really from a partnership level, so we're not in science anymore, but it's always interesting to understand how these projects and programs are built. AFD are bringing about 77% of the funding, but they have co-funding requirements where we have to go and raise minimum 20% of the total budget with other organizations. These are just the confirmed, but we're still missing some funding that we have to find before the end of the project. So yeah, this was just an example of how complex a project, the multi-sectoral project can look. These are just some research ideas. As I've been sharing with some colleagues, we're really, so we're a field-based implementation NGO that is slowly starting to look at external partners to better structure our data collection and also participate in studies, because we think, or as Runa says, who's here in yellow, it seems to work, but she doesn't know why, and it was done in an organic way. So now we want to try and model the friendship development model to see how we can better improve it, so maximize impact for the local communities, but also share it with partners around the world that could be inspired for different settings. I think these are mainly around food safety, but on any of the topics or sectors that you've seen, we have research ideas. Mangroves are a big one, the whole health system. So if you're interested in any of this, please feel free to reach out. Just some references, and thank you very much for listening.
Do we have any questions in the room?
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I have a question. Do you work with another organization for animal health?
Yeah, so we're slowly starting to develop para-veterinarians in the communities in the same way that we have paramedics. And so the veterinarians will be trained, para-veterinarians will be trained by either in-house veterinarians that work within our sustainable economic development sector or with the National Veterinary Authority. But it's something that we're slowly starting to develop. So any ideas, we're very welcome to.
Thanks for the presentation. We spoke about this before, but I find it interesting. You flip my paradigm of like the supply side doesn't move, but the demand side does, because here your supply side moves around. How do you decide where the boat goes if there's some sort of extreme event? Because I got a sense that there's a routine set of locations it goes to, but what if something unforeseen happens? Do you reroute or do you continue that?
So because
route?
the big hostile ships obviously take a lot, I'm not on the screen anymore, but the big hostile ships take a lot of logistics and setting up. Those will mainly stay set for those 3 months. However, we have a network of smaller speedboats that can provide relief and referrals to the hospital ships or other government facilities during a flash flood or another type of emergency. And all of this will be monitored live by the digital software that was identified, where community Medicaid can flag any emergency live, and that will send a message to the head office in Dhaka that can then deploy the fleet and services as needed.
Thank you very much, Max.